principles and recommendations. What are the most important and urgent findings and recommendations, and will any of them require congressional approval?
Thank you, Senator, and I want to thank you and your staff and the staff of this committee for spending a great deal of time with those of us at Treasury talking about the sanctions review. As you will see from the report and also from my testimony this morning, the findings that we have largely align with the principles this committee has outlined. The key for us is making sure that as we think about sanctions on a go-forward basis, we're making the investments today to keep up with innovations, not only technology, but innovations by our adversaries that are attempting to bypass our sanctions. This will require us to do more multilaterally. Frankly, by doing more multilaterally, put ourselves in a place where when we decide to act unilaterally, we have greater power in terms of our ability to affect change, the change of behavior, which is the ultimate goal of sanctions. We're going to need to work with Congress to advance things like creating the type of opportunities within the executive branch to hire staff who understand issues like crypto going forward, so looking to Congress to help us with hiring authorities. The President's FY22 budget includes additional resources which will allow us to build on the technological expertise that we need in the Treasury Department, and will also help us bring on the type of workforce we need to ensure that we're able to meet these challenges going forward. A great deal of the work that we need to do will need to happen with our executive branch colleagues, but we look forward to also working with Congress to advance these important goals.
Thank you. The importance of your strikes me as this review is especially important because the last time U.S. sanctions were reviewed comprehensively was 20 years ago, and it resulted in the enactment of a new law requiring exclusion of trade in agriculture and medicine and medical products from sanctions. Clearly, we need to work harder to avoid collateral consequences of sanctions on humanitarian and on humanitarian aid. So my question is this, especially as the pandemic continues to put all of us at risk as variants mutate around the globe, what specific new steps are you recommending that Treasury take to mitigate the harm to humanitarian aid efforts?
Senator, it's critical that, especially in areas where sanctions are used, humanitarian assistance is able to continue to flow. We've learned a great deal from what we've done over the last 20 years. You'll see that some of that has been applied to some of the sanctions programs that we've introduced recently. For example, the President's executive order with regard to actions occurring in Ethiopia. When we issued that executive order, we also put out general licenses at the same time to ensure that humanitarian assistance would continue to flow. One of the challenges that we have is that we often will announce sanctions programs and then wait to hear from humanitarian groups before we then issue guidance to provide them with the ability to continue to flow humanitarian assistance into these areas. Our goal now needs to be to ensure that we take the lessons we've learned from the last 20 years and ensure that humanitarian assistance can be provided alongside our sanctions programs in order to meet the needs of people who are suffering in these areas, especially during this moment of COVID. Ensuring that medicine and food can get to these affected people is not only consistent with our values, but it will help us end the pandemic globally.
A number of critics have argued that the sort of clumsy use or the overuse of sanctions, of unilateral sanctions by the U.S., especially during the Trump administration, played into the hands of our adversaries. How concerned are you about efforts by China and Russia and others to insulate themselves from U.S. sanctions, including by moving away from dollarized transactions, creating new financial messaging systems, or taking other similar efforts? Do you view these efforts, if they were to persist and intensify, as posing a threat to the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency?
Senator, my view is that the U.S. dollar as the world reserve for currency will remain for a number of reasons, including the fact that we've made the needed investments in America. Ultimately, people are going to want to invest in America and do business here because of the strength of our economy and the openness of our system and the certainty of our laws. But it is true that if we do not use sanctions appropriately, it will drive not only our adversaries, but a number of others to look for ways around the use of the dollar in their financial dealings. Our goal then needs to be to make sure that we do two things. One is that in in using our sanctions, we need to use a framework that's consistent with the principles, frankly, that this committee has been outlining for a long time. But in addition to doing that, we need to try and multilateralize our sanctions whenever possible. While it's hard to avoid being engaged in financial transactions that avoid the dollar, it's even harder to avoid financial transactions that avoid the dollar, the euro, the pound, and the yen. That's why it's critical that more often we try and do things multilaterally with our allies and partners going forward.
Thank you.